means we're going to record the session. And we also are going to enable closed captions. I think Neil's going to be doing that. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Martha King. I'm one of the co-chairs of Go Vote NYC. I'm also a senior program officer at the Revson Foundation. And as many of you know, Go Vote NYC is a funder collaborative, and since launching in 2021, 16 donors have contributed $4.8 million to this effort to increase voter participation in New York City. Go Vote NYC has shown that nonprofits who are trusted messengers in their communities can inspire people who have not voted in the past to vote in higher numbers, often at double the rate of New Yorkers who are not engaged by these nonprofits. So we have a lot of untapped civic power potential in our nonprofit community. I'm thrilled to see so many of you who have made Go Vote NYC into what it is here on this call. I want to thank Neil Coleman, who's directing the fund and putting together these discussions, and also Sabrina Collazo and Pat Swan, who are also co-chairs of Go Vote NYC. We periodically at Go Vote NYC have public discussions like this one. We aim to have conversations about the issues underlying and impacting civic engagement and voter participation in the city. In the past, we've talked about consolidated or even year elections, open primaries, the youth vote, and more. And today we are here to discuss civic trust and engagement in the city, and in particular, what our local government can, should, and is doing about this. We're honored and very lucky to be joined today by Betsy McLean, the Chief Engagement Officer for the City of New York, Dr. Sarah Saeed, the Executive Director and Chair of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission, and the city's Chief Democracy Officer, Kathleen Daniel. All three of these powerhouses are also, thankfully, advisors to the Go Vote NYC Fund. They are on the advisory board. And just as background, last year, Mayor Adams announced an Office of Engagement, which is led by Betsy. And this office is intended to increase and improve and enhance community engagement in New York. The only other office like this in a US major city is Chicago. And so Betsy, Dr. Saeed, and Kathleen are really the leaders of the city's democracy building team. So it's very apt that they're here with us today. Our plan is to spend the first 45 minutes with me asking a few questions, and the final 45 minutes with questions from all of you. To make this conversational, you can raise your real hand, you can raise your Zoom hand, you can unmute yourself as long as we're not talking over each other. Neil and I will try to keep track of people who do raise whichever hand works. And I hope we have a very productive discussion. I thought we'd jump in today really with an introduction to what all of you do. And Betsy, I was hoping you could start us off by briefly introducing us to your office. Why do we have it? What does it look like? And what are you working on?
Sure. Hi, thanks, Martha. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. Some old pals in the house. Apologies for being a little bit late. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea behind the Office of Engagement and this kind of Chief Engagement Officer position, I think, is like a long-held dream to really think about coordinate government-led community engagement across city agencies. Before coming to the city in the last year and a half, I spent my whole career pretty much in nonprofits and have been on the receiving end, as I'm sure all of you have, of some pretty bad government-led community engagement. Stuff that, it makes you feel like government's not talking to each other, one agency isn't talking to another, makes you feel like they've never done any research on you, your community, your neighborhood. Or kind of the worst case scenario, I think, is when government comes, asks for your opinion, and then doesn't do anything with it, or actually does the opposite. And so, the idea was, the dream was to really have kind of almost like a community engagement HQ at City Hall that not only kind of coordinates and oversees the primary engagement offices two of whom are here with us, and the kind of warriors in the democracy space, Sarah, Saeed, and Kathleen Daniel, but also the public engagement unit, the community affairs unit, NYC service, which really focuses on volunteerism and public service, and of course civic engagement commission. But in addition to that, really kind of creating the vehicles for coordination and collaboration across agencies. So our idea is kind of threefold. Like, one is folks just need to be talking to each other. So if, for example, EDC is doing a project at Kingsbridge Armory, they should certainly be talking to SBS if they're doing a project, DOT, whoever else is doing a project in and around Kingsbridge, so that we're not only learning from each other, but also learning from community members. I think the other piece is really to offer technical assistance, which is really in my kind of role previously. I led Hester Street. We did a lot of that work kind of in between government and community, really trying to get to a place where community engagement is all of the things we know it needs to be effective. So inclusive, equitable, accountable, all of those things. And then there's a kind of a data component too, which we can talk about later. But I think the big picture is just that community engagement we need to shift the paradigm. So the community engagement, talking to New Yorkers isn't like a nice to have or something we do every once in a while, but something that we kind of systematically do as a core function of everything that government does, from policy making to program design and implementation. So that's like the idea. And we've been working hard to kind of create the systems to make that possible. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's not just like kind of creating systems that we need to do, but there's also a culture shift, which is fairly major and takes time. But anyway, that's the idea. I hope that's helpful.
That's very helpful. And we'll get into some of the systems that you're building and the initiatives you're running. Dr. Saeed, do you want to give us an overview of the Civic Engagement Commission, which is part of this overall effort and doing a lot more on its own as well? We can't hear you.
Apologies.
There we go.
Yeah, I think most people here, good morning, first of all, everyone, and thank you so much to go vote for this opportunity to speak this morning, and also the opportunity to be a part of your advisory group. I'm finding that conversation really enriching, so thank you so much for the chance to connect with you and all these amazing partners who are on the call today. Where was I? Oh, right. Most of you probably have already heard about the Civic Engagement Commission, though if you have not, no worries, a lot of people haven't. We are actually a new organization or entity office inside city government. And the reason we exist is because voters put us on the ballot in 2018 as part of the charter reform process and voted for the creation of the commission. So one of our challenges is definitely making ourselves known. And the commission's charge per the charter is really to try to kind of centralize and reimagine civic engagement and build civic trust. That is actually written into the mission of the commission in the charter. And I was super curious, at the beginning, and still curious about ways we measure civic trust, and really wonderful opportunities to work with Betsy in this space to think about that more deeply. And then also I checked in the city charter, just curious, like, where else do we talk about civic trust? Because every agency is in the business or doing the work of building civic trust, and it doesn't really appear anywhere in the charter except in the commission's mission. So I found that really interesting, as a point of like discourse about where we are with democracy, right? Because before that moment, I think there was a realization that there's a crisis of trust, in terms of democratic systems and elections, and there was a need to kind of put that language in the charter, which I think is really interesting. So programmatically, the commission is charged with running a citywide participatory budgeting program, and that is building off of City Council's program, which many council members opted into, though not all council members. And I think, again, voters wanted to see this process spread citywide, beyond kind of the opting in of many council members. So our charge is citywide PB, and then language assistance at poll sites. That's also building on the work of the Board of Elections, trying to keep up with the city demographics that are rapidly shifting. And we know that serving languages only in the Voting Rights Act languages doesn't cover, population shifts, including, for example, Russian, Haitian Creole, as examples of languages that are not served. So we're complementary to the Board of Elections, and then strengthening community boards, working in partnership with the Department of City Planning to provide land use assistance to community boards, and training for community board members to strengthen their capacity to work with communities. So a lot of the mandate, well, I would say all of the mandates of the commission are really trying to shore up and strengthen processes that already exist at the city, in different places, different, city government offices, including, borough presidents who work closely with the boards. So that is kind of the bulk of our work. In addition to those three kind of mandates that are baked into the charter, CEC is also responsible for oversight of the Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity's neighborhood initiative, which is in 33 neighborhoods, seeking to build coalitions and strengthen coalitions that already exist. And this program started during the pandemic as a means to really help make sure that residents had more access to information from the city, just to support their health and well-being. And that has really grown in the past 3 years to be less health focused, more civic engagement focused. And most recently, CEC also acquired the responsibility of managing the Democracy NYC program, which formerly lived in the mayor's office. And that to us is like another exciting opportunity. Both of these initiatives are wonderful opportunities for us to create more synergy, build momentum around the work that is already happening in the city. So that's kind of like the overview of where we are, with the commission, and really looking forward to kind of working with all of our community partners. Community partners are like a very huge part of the work we're doing, both through the Tree Coalition Initiative as well as citywide participatory budgeting. And we have 2 advisory groups that are charter mandated, again, language access advisory, participatory budgeting advisory groups. And the hope is that with, all of this work that we are doing, increasing ways to participate, really trying to build capacity of community board members, residents, building leadership, really trying to build collaboration across all of the work we're doing. We're hoping to become more responsive to communities, increasing participation and building a just city, an inclusive city for all New Yorkers. So that's kind of the overview of where we are. And sorry, just one thing to throw in there. The commission has grown a lot. We started with 7 lines, and I'm incredibly grateful for the ways in which we've grown. We are now at 22. Actually, starting at the beginning of the fiscal year, we had 25 full-time employees, lines. Not all of them are filled. And then pre-PEG, our budget was 13.5. So it's grown a lot. A large part of that budget is for citywide participatory budgeting. So I'll talk more about that later.
Great. And I do want to get Kathleen, you involved here. Just quickly, Dr. Said, what is the budget for the commission? When you say 25 staff people, what is the overall budget?
It's about 13.5 at the beginning of the fiscal year. Yeah, that's pre-PEG, of course.
So Kathleen, as Chief Democracy Officer, we're talking about civic trust. We're talking about engagement. I'm wondering what you see as the sort of current state of play of that in the city and how that's impacting your plans. and priorities?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Martha. And thank you, Go Vote, for hosting this conversation, Martha, for facilitating it. That's a loaded question. So let me see if I can get it a quick answer for you in 5 hours or less, right? And it's so great to see so many of our partners. I see Sanda, I see Amanda from CFB. I mean, all of our partners and compadres in this space. It's just great to see you all again, and looking forward to continued good trouble with all of you. Luisa, I mean, it's everybody is here, and so this is really, I'm so grateful to be among you as part of this, because I'm grateful to you and for you all, because this does not get fixed with one group, with one agency, with one unit. It is going to take this entire village of advocates all pulling together, pushing where we have to, kick down a couple of doors maybe to get this done. So in terms of the state of play, when we talk about civic trust, and I want to delineate, there is a difference between civic trust and civic engagement, right? Because that New Yorkers don't care ain't true. Never has been. And all of us that are on the ground and having conversations, yeah, it's a hard distance, a long distance to get from the panel to the door, because people have so many issues and concerns that they want to raise and they want to talk about, and they want to know, how do I get that done, right? They're looking for that one warm body in government that they can hold on to, and no matter what department you're actually with, they're going to hold on to you for all of their needs. And all of you doing CBO work and service on the ground, you know this. This is why the census model, where we are working with CBOs that are the validators on the ground that people are already going to, that are already doing this work, is so important. And so that is, it is the work that we continue to do. We're doing that at the Civic Engagement Commission in a number of our program lanes, working with our TREE Coalition, which are the groups, the CBOs that are funded to do work with us on the task force for racial inclusion and equity neighborhoods, these focused neighborhoods. We are doing this in multiple agencies. Democracy NYC, in our June primary campaign, funded a number of organizations to work with us on the ground as advocates. And when we look at civic trust, trust is simply not something New Yorkers do, right? It's not something that I do, and I'm sitting here as part of the bureaucracy. And the state of play for trust is challenging. It became at some point cool to distrust. It became part of the culture and the norm, not to trust government, not to trust agencies until or unless they did something for you. Very Janet Jackson, what have you done for me lately? Was I able to, have a good experience at this agency? And if not, then all of them, I'm painting with the same brush. And so it is severe right now, the state of distrust, particularly when we're looking at elections and voter engagement, because there is voter fatigue. And they are fatigued with the number of elections. They're fatigued with what they perceive as a lack of information about the candidates, and they're fatigued with the candidates themselves. And the entire process. When we look at civic engagement, however, and you look across communities, people are involved in their houses of worship. People are, and on committees, people are doing the work. People are involved with their CBOs. They are involved with their civic organizations. There are fraternities, sororities, civic societies, honor societies. They're involved as alumni in institutions. They're involved around the schoolhouse, where their children go. And there are block associations, tenant associations. So people are involved. I think that one of the challenges that we face in terms of civic engagement, which is the cornerstone for building civic trust, is that people need assistance from us to identify different points of entry. How do I'm willing to fit in, to get in where I fit in, but where can I get in? And I'm going to liken this as a Brooklyn girl to the double Dutch rope. It is just continually going. There's a constant cycle. There's always something going on, and people are looking for that way. They're poised. How do I get in to rename the street? How do I get in to get this garbage picked up? How do I get in to get the rat situation here, or protect the tenants in the building our landlord hasn't done repairs, right? And in so doing, by getting involved and showing them different points of entry, even for a time, then we're building relationships, because You don't have a relationship, you haven't met anyone until you've met them, right? So we have to begin wherever we can begin. And I think by identifying these portals so that they can beam in, even if they beam out shortly thereafter, we can do so. And one of the, I think, best examples is NYC Services Spread Love campaign, where NYC Service and in City Hall, under Betsy McLean's leadership in the Office of Engagement, we are encouraging New Yorkers to get involved and volunteer, even if it's for 2 hours, because in so doing, now they're engaging. And once we can get them in a door, we have an opportunity to continue the conversation, to continue the discourse, find out what they care about, and keep showing them other doors, other opportunities. I consider the state of trust is not there, but let's think Monsters, Inc. You can tell I'm a mom. In Monsters, Inc., the monsters have to go in and out of all of these different doors, and you don't know where you're going to land. We need an opportunity that is not scary, like they learned at the end of the movie, that is not frightening, to show citizens, residents, everyone, no matter what their status, the right doors, and that there are many for them to go in and out of.
Thank you. And I'm curious, maybe we can talk about this later, whether or not we are seeing any trends or upticks in volunteer service among New Yorkers. But Betsy, I wanted to think about, New York City Speaks, which you were one of the main architects of, and it was one of the major initiatives run out of your office, or maybe it was pre your office. But I'm wondering why you did New York Speaks, what we learned from it, and how it changed city government and the way that the city's investing or operating, and some of the ways that Dr. Saeed and Kathleen have sort of talked about needing change in that way.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit. So NYC Speaks, like the idea was to, as the new administration was coming in, to kind of broadly survey New Yorkers on their kind of policy priorities, in order to shape the kind of priorities and agenda of the new administration. We've seen it before when the de Blasio administration came in. They did, I think it was called Talking, I can't remember what it was called. But it was kind of downtown, like in Tribeca, there was a tent and it was like a thing. And so we did it slightly differently. I think we, I'm like a good nonprofit girl. Like I had some critiques of that approach. So we tried to do it differently. We tried to do it kind of more in a way that was more inclusive and equitable, really focusing on communities that don't typically participate and or participate but are not listened to or heard. So we partnered with a number of community-based organizations to help us distribute this survey across the city, but particularly focused on the neighborhoods hardest hit by COVID, largely Black and Brown, low-income communities. So we did a kind of a series of, first there was a survey, we got almost 70,000 responses, almost 20,000 from kids in New York City public schools. So that was cool, like that's like engagement at scale. Then knowing that a survey is just but one kind of step into the realm of like, let's talk about issues with New Yorkers. So then we worked with CBOs, resourced them to kind of convene community members to have deeper conversations about those issues that were surfaced in the survey. So then we did a series of those, engaged a whole bunch more people. And then the third phase was taking everything we learned from the survey and then from those community conversations, and then kind of holding these action planning workshops, which were workshops kind of dedicated around a particular issue and made up of a small group of a kind of combination of policymakers, agency reps, and CBO representatives and residents, to really kind of talk through and be like, now we know what's important, what do we want to do with it? So out of that came like a whole bunch of recommendations. And from there, we've been able to kind of build out a number of programs. I'll talk about a couple different ones. One is this Justice Learning Collaborative. One thing that came out a lot was an intense need for and desire to ensure that New Yorkers returning back home, back to the neighborhoods after being incarcerated, have a kind of a smoother path to housing. So what we did was kind of assemble this cross-sectoral group of folks from lots of different agencies, lots of different nonprofits, from the kind of criminal justice space, from DA's offices and the court system, to be able to really kind of take a step back and see like the whole elephant. If you know that parable of like the five folks, five blind men go and touch an elephant all in different parts, and everyone's touching the part that they're touching. They touch the trunk and it's like, oh, it's a garden hose. Touch the tail and it's like, oh, it's a broom. But then when they take off the blindfolds, then it's like, it's the whole elephant. So that's kind of the theory, is that we all know what we know, our kind of silo, our slim kind of part of the chunk of the entire system, and that by being able to kind of take a step back, work together, we're able to kind of see what works and what definitely doesn't work, and kind of get to some of the quicker fixes that are more of the kind of operational fixes that don't require millions of dollars to build affordable housing and lots of years to do that. It's for supportive housing, which we absolutely need. But we also can just like fix some stuff now. That's just a kind of a dysfunction of the system. So that's one thing that came out of there. The other thing that came out of there, and really kind of tying into, I think, what we're talking about today, is kind of civic trust, is, so we're launching a kind of NYC Speaks 2.0 version. The first was this policy survey, which, in addition to leading to these projects, also really informed many of both the deputy mayors and many of the commissioners, the new commissioners' kind of priorities as they took their new roles. The chief housing officer in particular really kind of leaned on what we gleaned from NYC Speaks. So that was heartening, I think, to see the kind of desire for folks. And I have been, kind of pleasantly surprised that overall folks are just really hungry. I find policymakers and leaders, government leaders, to be pretty hungry to know what New Yorkers think and want, and that there is no real systemic way to do that. So that has inspired this kind of 2.0 version that really gets us to, we have so much data, right? And I know you all are like neck deep in the data all the time, from everything from the census, from the Department of Health, to city planning, to all of the different data sources. I think what's largely missing is, kind of consistent qualitative data from New Yorkers about their experience being New Yorkers, which really kind of really rounds out the picture of kind of the New York experience. Having worked in communities a lot, my own experience is, if I kind of do a desktop research and look at city planning's community board profile of a particular neighborhood, I get one image of that neighborhood, and then I go and talk to folks in the neighborhood, it's totally different image. So really needing to kind of round out that picture for government, for us to be able to not only kind of dig into why do New Yorkers trust government institutions? How do New Yorkers, what is their kind of overall life satisfaction, their sense of belonging, their feeling of agency, which is deeply tied to both overall well-being, but also to justice and equity. So really kind of digging in on that stuff, so we know what I'm hopeful for, this is like the dream, is that then goes to both the things we talked about a little bit earlier, which is changing both systems, like kind of the way policy is made, the way investments are designed, but then also like the kind of culture, that whole thing of like, you measure what you value instead of value what you measure. So that's what we're moving towards there. And I think that's the idea of NYC Speaks, is really to systematize, institutionalize kind of community voice as much as possible throughout government.
In terms of that example with the Justice Learning Collaborative, was there like a public report, or was there a resulting investment in the collaborative?
Yeah, so the report is just about to be spoiler alert, Martha. It's just about to be released. And the idea with the Justice Learning Collaborative, we took kind of a budget neutral approach. Because I think, again, with most things, and I know you all know this from your work, we've been talking about this for a long time, like supportive housing and the need for supportive housing for a long time. And many of those answers we already know, right? And we know we need a lot more of it. And so this was slightly not to kind of gloss over the need for new supportive housing and how desperately needed that is. We also wanted to get at how can we fix what we have in our control right this minute. So anyways, we have a set of recommendations and then ongoing work. Again, this kind of cross-sectoral interagency work. We're running it with the Center for Supportive Housing, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, and the Osmore Association.
And Dr. Saeed, with the people's money and the major participatory budgeting initiative that the commission ran, one, I just want to make sure that everyone here is familiar with that, but I'm also curious whether or not what the experience with that project, whether or not it mirrored any of the experience or findings from New York City Speaks, or how those sort of interacted as well in terms of priorities and engagement of New Yorkers in the process. I was very happy to vote in people's money. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for participating. And I hope many people on the call also participated. So where to start with that? I mean, certainly I think these, as Kathleen was mentioning also, like I think all of these different processes are looking to give people opportunities to connect with government. So they're really, building off of each other. And I think both with NYC Speaks as well as with participatory budgeting, we have the opportunity to kind of see what issues are really important to New Yorkers, right? And we were also trying to kind of leverage the data that we already have in the space and share data with residents and as part of our idea generation sessions from the needs assessment surveys that the city does, NYC Speaks survey, like these are all different data points. So we wanted to familiarize people with the existing data in their neighborhoods and get them to talk about what they thought was important to fund as part of PB. I think they're all very interconnected. And I'm not sure, do you want me to get into a little bit of the overview of how the process went for the first year?
Sure. How many? Yeah, all the money and the people who participated. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So for the first cycle of the city's first ever citywide participatory budgeting program, we had $5 million in the pot, and it was all expense funding, which is distinct from what the council does, which is mostly capital funding. And our process kind of was tiered in the sense that we had a citywide process that focused on boroughs, and each borough had their own borough ballot. And then we had a process that was focused on the neighborhoods, which was just focus on the 33 equity neighborhoods that we had already been working in. So every New Yorker who lives in the 33 neighborhood, 11 years and older, regardless of citizenship, had the opportunity to vote on 2 ballots, one for their neighborhood and one for the borough. And for those who didn't live in those neighborhoods, they voted just on the borough ballot. So slightly more people participated in the borough process than the equity neighborhoods. We had around 110,000 people voting on borough ballots, and then about 98,000 people voting on the equity neighborhood ballots. And this is really, we kind of tripled the participation we had when we were just in the tree neighborhoods. The first pilot that we did, prior to last year. So that was really cool. And based on that process, we are now going to be implementing the projects that were selected. There are 46 projects. 13 of them are borough-based projects, and then 33 of them are at the neighborhood level. So we are going to be seeing, it's like kind of this year is really going to be telling in terms of proof of concept, right, to help the organizations. And we are working with CBO partners to implement those selected projects. and working with them also specifically to build capacity on evaluation monitoring as well during this time, so that when we are done at the end of the year, we'll be able to tell a story of, New Yorkers' participation and the tangible results of that participation. Because I think one of the things about civic trust, and one of the areas that we need to work in, is that we've all been talking about how people come to the table and don't always see results of what happens when they are speaking up. And we're hoping that with this expense kind of short-term process, New Yorkers will be able to see direct results of how, their engagement made a difference, and they will be able to experience that, at the neighborhood and borough level. A lot of the projects are focused on, many of the themes we all know are really important to communities. Think the things that came up in the NYC Speaks survey as well. Right now, there are about 12 projects at the citywide level, at the borough level, that are focusing on mental health. And similarly, at the borough, that was in the Troy neighborhoods. I have all these numbers in front of me, but a total of about 15 projects citywide are happening, focused on mental health. Some other projects are looking at job training, education, food insecurity, and I will drop the link into the chat where people could look at all of the projects that were selected. And we're working with CBO partners, like I said, again, to implement these programs that were selected at the neighborhood level. And concurrently, we're about to launch next week cycle 2, the second cycle of citywide PB, with idea generation sessions. And working so far, we put out an RFI both for participatory budgeting as well as for the Troy Neighborhood Initiative. And so far we have about 101 partners for participatory budgeting, working at different tiers. There are borough-based partners, demographic partners, because the charter charges us with working with specific communities that we know and populations that we know have been left out and are underserved. So we have that tier, and then we have neighborhoods being served, and orgs that just want to do one idea generation session. So there's like a wide variety of orgs and pathways to participate and be contracted to do this work. And then we'll be running an idea generation sessions with our Troy neighborhood partners as well.
I like talking about that, since there are dollars involved. I'm haunted by Betsy's comment of budget neutral approach, and that makes things quite difficult, I'm sure. And Kathleen, you had raised the census, and I know you were very involved, and similarly, Go Vote NYC grantees were very involved in Get Out the Count efforts in 2020. And they're still, as you are, working on democracy building efforts. And I'm wondering how the city, what the city took from that experience with the census into other democracy spaces, and also how you're supporting that infrastructure that was built during the census process.
Thank you, Martha. So the mission for Democracy NYC is to build a culture of voting in New York City. And we're doing that, we're using a grassroots approach. So I'm guilty as the former field director for NYC Census 2020 and community engagement director for New York City's Test and Trace. We had 700 pairs of boots on the ground, knocking on doors, visiting the sick, and working to stop the spread. Our mission is to stop the drop between voter registration and voter activation, but to do it with direct voter contact, boots on the ground, I'd like to call it New York guerrilla Disney style. We're going to be in your face, we're going to be everywhere, but we're going to be so pleasant about it, and you're going to love engaging with us, right? We're going to make it fun. And so part of my, I am tasked with recreating the census model. And in order to leverage that model, we were successful in getting people to do the census and to allay their fears in the midst of a lot of noise coming from the federal government. And so we kind of had to work against the tide right? In order to make that happen, we remember. And so we're dealing with the same thing right now with voter activation. We are great at registering people to vote. There are 5.3 million people on the rolls. 4.6 million of them on the rolls are active. But only 23% of that are going to the polls, right? And so we've got a major challenge here. So in recreating the census model, we work with all of our advocates, our partners, and in June, we were able to fund 5 different CBOs in addition to working with the Tree Coalition that we have. And we had advocates participating as well as employees citywide participating in days of action that we organize. We're kind of like at the helm, and we only helicopter in when there's an issue, but we empower people, train them, give them the tools that we borrow from our public engagement unit. We all work together, and then we provide those tools to community organizations, houses of worship, tenant associations to join us and help build capacity for each other so that they are promoting what they do and who they are. They are lending us their street creds, their validity on the ground and in communities, lending us their language skills. And then we are lending them resources and training and empowering them to have agency and go out and do for themselves and organize their communities, right? To give them voice. So one of the things that we want to recreate and are working diligently to do is having people in communities where we have the captive audiences, from the food pantry lines to the supermarkets, to the senior centers, really going to people where they are and speaking the language that they speak, that they are comfortable in, and empowering them and giving them agency by giving them information. And so in the census, I created a teach-in model. Very civil rights style, where each one would reach one, so each one could teach one. We do teach-ins with Democracy NYC now, and we're getting ready to have a boot camp for all of our partners so that we are talking about what is at stake that makes sense to people where they are, because you really don't care unless you know that it's happening to you. So what happens when people get elected to office, what they are able to do, how they represent you. It happens on your block, in your school, in your house of worship, in your community. It happens to you and to your family. And so we show people what's at stake in a way that makes sense to their everyday lives. And then we help people find the resources that they need. So there is the Board of Elections, there's the Campaign Finance Board, there's Democracy NYC. How is a voter supposed to know where to go? And so we are working to revamp our web pages, in the CEC website for Democracy NYC, so that we're pointing people in the right direction. If you're looking for this, then you're going here. If you're looking for that, then you're going there. Because people don't really care where they're getting the information as long as they know how to get the information. And that is one of the things that we were able to do with the census, was have this ubiquitous messaging with all of the grantees, with all of the CUNY students and the cores, and so that everybody was on message, singing in unison. This is how you do the census, and this is why it matters. And we're working to recreate that so that we can engage voters and activate them. Because voter registration without activation is more of the same. It's only going to compound the problem. And so we're doing that hand in hand. Another thing that we incorporated from the census campaign was the commitment card. We had people sign a little postcard and commit to doing the census with key information that they kept. And then we got their information to remind them to do it and to send them updates. And if they had any questions, they were able to speak to us. And we had that card in 23 different languages. So we're going to have our commitment card in 16 different languages, all the languages that the voter registration forms are available in, right? And we're going to be pointing people on our website to where to get the voter registration forms because the New York City Campaign Finance Board supplies some, and the Board of Elections supplies some. So again, this disjointed experience for the voters, we're going to collapse that and just have one-stop shop so that you can go into the DNYC Superstore and know, oh, this is the aisle for this, this is the aisle for that, right? And just helping people navigate, because our goal, again, is like Monsters, Inc. We're not scary. Here are your portals. Here's your entryway. Here is your access. And having everybody in the space working on one accord with one message of what is at stake and and why this matters. And you've got judge of the civil court, and you know that this is anybody ever been in landlord tenant court. This is why this matters. This is what they do, because a savvy voter is an active voter. So the more they know, the more we grow and can solve that problem. The other thing that we are working to incorporate, that we successfully incorporated in June. In June, we put boots on the ground. For the census, we had canvassers out that came from all walks of life, different city agencies, houses of worship. We had a paid canvassing operation. We had a 220 CUNY student CUNY Corps, and we actually went out and canvassed. We went into communities, hung up posters, did tabling, knocked on doors. And in June, this past June, for the primary, we were successfully able to knock on, I believe it is, so we made 107,000 phone calls, sent 583,000 text messages, and knocked on 112,000 doors. And going direct, when you knock on a door in New York City, you don't know what country is going to open up the door for you, from the music to the smells to the sights, and what language is best for you to speak. And when people see that you're consistently coming to their door, you're consistently contacting them and seeking them out. We experienced it in Test and Trace, we experienced it in the census. They are happy that somebody cares and even knows that, like, oh, you're here to see me? Why? Wait, this is great. Particularly in crisis, when nobody was visiting anybody in Test and Trace. And when you have a campaign that's coordinated and the same group, the same people are going to the same doors, then you are beginning to build that relationship. Then you start to take away the scary aspect, like, you're here again. When is the election? How do I sign up for this? Okay, I'll do it. And we are looking forward to, we're currently analyzing our data to see, of all of the people we contacted, all the phone calls we made, all the commitment cards we garnered, all the doors we knocked on, how many of them actually turned out to vote. And we are so excited to be able to then take a look at that and see our trends and tell the story.
Obviously, we agree very much with that approach in terms of person to person, and in particular relational outreach. It's not cheap, but it is what works. I want to open it up. So many people on this call already work together, so many experts on all of these issues that we're talking about. So as I mentioned before, please just unmute yourself or raise your real hand or your Zoom hand, and let's get a conversation going.
I see a question in the chat. Could I start by answering it?
Yes, please.
I think it's a really, really important question. And I know we touched on it in different ways. And what I wanted to speak to is really, the trying to be imaginative in how we do civic engagement. And I think that you're right, Jessica. The confusion between politics and civic engagement and government, and even the word civic engagement, is so unfamiliar to a lot of people, and it's definitely not plain English. We were talking yesterday, we had in our team meeting, we were talking about language access and translation interpretation, like civic engagement, democracy. Like, these are terms that are very just hard to help people understand in their true essence, in the way that a fluent English speaker may. So what I wanted to speak to about the fear part, and I'm personally very interested in how our physiologies manifest fear, and how do we get out of a space of fear, at the biology level. And that's just one of my interests. And I do think that because there is so much fear and cynicism out there, we need to have ways of doing this kind of work that are imaginative, creative, make engagement memorable, inviting. And also, we at the commission talk about centering joy and the arts. And I think these are important ways that, when people are afraid or they're isolated, I think really connecting with people's hearts is really important. And though, we're experimenting with that. Where we had an artist in residence, for example, who brought in other partners, including a youth fellows program. And there was a process that we went through to transform a bus that had been originally used at Rikers Island to transport detainees. And that bus went through a public transformation. When I say public, the public had gave us feedback about what kind of programming they wanted to see on the bus, what the bus will look like, and it's been a beautiful transformation. And that bus then went out into communities, and there was an arts festival that went with that. So that's an example. And last year we also worked with we developed an artist residency for artists to work with us to design some graphics for the PV program that were very borough specific, and each artist was from a different borough. So these are things that I think, and I'm sure a lot of you are on the call are already also working in this space of like thinking about the connection between arts and civics. And I think to respond to the question, I think we need to kind of help calm and center people more in like the bodily experience of a positive civic engagement, because right now all the engagement work that has been done so far, like we need new ways to do this work, because I think it has led to broken trust. So the creative thing, and I think also thinking about the connection between restorative approaches to conflict with communities, between communities and government. I came to the space of civic engagement as a senior advisor on Muslim engagement to Mayor de Blasio at a time when the community and government the trust was completely shattered. Post 9/11, the Muslim community was under surveillance, and that carried into how community members interacted with government. And I came to government with a peace building and conflict mediation resolution lens from an interfaith years of work in the interfaith space. And I think that's another lens that has been very helpful to me, and I think will be helpful to all of us who are doing this work, because communities and government are in conflict. And we need to think about mediating and restoring that conflict with centering justice and equity in that work. So we do partner with the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution that is under oath. We've done some training work with them to train our staff in some of those approaches. It's all like just like surface dabbling, but I think these are some of the things that we could root this work in.
Thanks, Dr. Said.
If I can just piggyback quickly on that as well. One of the challenges that I think we have in bureaucracy is that we are just this behemoth. We are so big, it is difficult to move and be flexible. And what we have found as well in my experience as being successful is know that this is the way we do this, have your infrastructure and your rubric set up. But when dealing with CBOs, when dealing with organizations that are coming into the bureaucracy to assist to do the work, then customize. We have one example. There was an organization that wanted to participate with us, and they served people that were not citizens yet, who were leery. We have other organizations of women that are part of a domestic violence survivors collective. So these are not people that want their names on lists. They don't want us keeping records of them. And so what we did was worked only with the leaders of these organizations, and they imparted information to their constituents and participants in the way that they knew everyone was comfortable. And people came to meetings, but we didn't have sign-in lists. We when we had to email things to people, we used a central email. So was this the way that we had planned the program? No. But was it effective, and did we empower people and give voice to the voiceless? Yes. And that is one of the challenges when you have something that is established and set up the way that it is, and it's not flexible. But flexibility is absolutely required when you're working with organizations, houses of worship, people who have a reason to distrust. They have they have an anecdotal reference for what happens when their name is on a list. And that was one of the biggest challenges that we had with the census is, you want me to give you a list of everybody in my house? wait a minute, wait, what? No, I can't do that. And working with people to alleviate that fear and showing them, look, we want to work with you. We want to empower you. We want to give you agency. What is the best way for us to do that with you? And then making that work and making that happen.
Laura, I know you raised your hand if you wanted to jump in.
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers. It's such a good conversation. There are a lot of Venn diagrams happening here. And one that I really love is you're all talking a lot about civic trust. So, but I feel like one of the biggest challenges in that regard is the agency culture that I think each of you touched on, changing agency culture and agency cross collaboration. So I'd love to hear how you think about that, things that are working, things you would like to try, any concrete things that are going on.
I'm happy to jump in. Hey Laura, good to see you. So I mean, I think a couple of things. I think there's some like model making that we're doing, like a little bit of like kind of piloting different structures where we're bringing lots of agencies together, so that and kind of facilitating ongoing collaboration. We did that with the Gun Violence Task Force, with the This Justice Learning Collaborative. We're doing that with our benefits program. So like really kind of creating the spaces, which feels fairly fundamental. But as folks who have worked with or in or whatever, live in damn New York City, like, you know, it just doesn't happen very often. So it's fairly revolutionary to just bring a bunch of people into a room together. And making sure that that space, just like any, is a safe space where folks feel like they can honestly kind of be true collaborators and moving towards, you know, kind of a common goal. So that's one side. I think the other piece, Laura, I think is really this data piece. At least, you know, from my perspective, and again, this is kind of on the institutional side, the very like unsexy, let's create some really boring systems that will hopefully transform everything. But I think there's like, you know, I mean, there are, again, if anyone's ever looked at the mayor's management report that comes out twice a year, that's, you know, it's like one of the old school phone books, like 600 pages long. Like no person would ever want to read that damn thing. But you know, we have just, again, reams and reams and reams of data of agencies essentially like kind of reporting on their own metrics, on their own kind of predefined metrics. And what I find that, you know, largely to be, I think it's a really important tool for kind of enforcing procedural justice. Like government must deliver for communities on that level of like, here are the services that government provides. You have to provide them well, provide them equitably, and consistently, and be able to kind of, when there are problems, fix them, identify them and fix them kind of in the service delivery. I think, but within that gigantic book, there are zero metrics on kind of civic engagement, on engaging New Yorkers, on kind of quality, like how is it that your programs are shaped by New Yorkers? How are you taking input from New Yorkers and changing the way you do business? Like there's absolutely nothing in there. So that to me is, if we're not even looking at that, if no one is being held to account for how they're being responsive to New Yorkers, then fundamentally we'll never get anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like no one is being held accountable for that. No one is paying attention to that. We don't even have a very good kind of baseline of like, what is that experience for New Yorkers? We know if trash went, you know, if trash is picked up on time and where, and how many barrels of trash and all of that stuff, like kind of, but what we don't know is, does that work for, you know, how does that land in your neighborhood? Do you feel it? I mean, it's a lot like, and I know a lot of folks in the space know this with crime statistics. We know a lot about crime. We know very little about, other than kind of anecdotally, it's not something that we hold NYPD to account for. It's like, do New Yorkers feel safe in their neighborhoods? Do they trust the police? What is that kind of that level of performance evaluation? So to me, those are some pretty important things and concrete things that we're working on.
Andrea, are you still on the call? Put a question in the Oh,
I
hi.
am. I just wanted to hear, I mean, you all talked about your commitment cards and you talked about the artist in residency, which are all such amazing tactics. I would love to hear you all talk about where you felt you were the most innovative and thinking out of the box in terms of tactics and strategies.
Who'd like to go?
Ooh, can I start? So let me make sure I got you right because you said thinking out of the box tactic strategies. So you want to know what we've done or what we're planning to do, or both?
Something that's exciting you that will inspire the group.
So what does not excite me about this work? I love this work. So one of the things that we are planning, this is around student voter registration. So in New York, it has been signed into law now that all school boards, all education across the state, all education services, all schools, etc., promote voter registration and pre-registration for students. So 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register. And we have been in partnership for many years with the CFB, Campaign Finance Board, who trains student leaders, the New York City Public Schools, no longer the DOE, NYCPS, who has Civics Week, where we then go in with the public engagement unit. Like this is a family affair in terms of engagement, folks. And we go in and we work with students, do a quickie teach-in in the classrooms, and then we register and pre-register them to vote. This year, for the first time ever, we are expanding that to not just New York City public schools and just in Civics Weeks, but we're making this an evergreen activity and including the private, parochial, and charter schools. New territory. And one of the things that we have to do in order to create a culture of voting is to make this sexy. Who doesn't want to be sexy, right? And so we're going to have some contests at different schools. And this will happen throughout the year where we teach them to stroll to the polls, right? So students will come up with a like 30 to 50-second dance and show their stroll to the polls. And this is something, I'll drop in the link. This is something that a lot of the African-American and Latino Greek letter organizations of fraternity sororities have been doing for some time. It rose to great popularity when Kamala Harris was running with Joe Biden a few years ago. And so what do teenagers do? They get onto these social media apps and they dance. And I have been accused myself, yes, of mommy dancing. So we're going to invite everybody to, have some different contests at their schools. We'll go and give gift cards to the winners, but popularize. Yes, the reason you're doing this is because it is so important. And here's what's at stake, that you become a voter. And we're adapting this, as a former school board president. Remember when college applications and everything else you did by mail, and now you do nothing by mail? And so we used to have rallies at the schools where the students would get their college applications and they would march over to the post office and make a big deal of it. And the community would show up. Well, since that's not being done anymore and they live in a digital environment, we're going to encourage them to create a little dance and do your stroll to the polls. And then we can talk to them about why it's important to vote. And I'm very excited about that. I got my mommy dances ready.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Sanda and then Isaiah, I see your hands up.
Sure. First of all, just want to express huge gratitude to this panel, which I think is really embodying what it means to build civic trust, both all of your comments today, which resonate so deeply, and all of the work that you are doing. I feel so fortunate that our young people with Why Vote have been able to partner with each of your organizations, which I think speaks volumes of the way that you are investing in communities. I am building on Kathleen's answer to that last question. Oh, I also wanted to sort of say, I love the point, so many of the points that you raised, but also about this virtuous cycle between civic engagement and civic trust and how they build and mutually reinforce one another. and the need for assistance from us to provide points of entry, and on-ramps to solving problems that matter to them locally and to getting people involved in issues that matter to them. And we are building a digital youth civic hub with support from the Rebson Foundation very much to do this and to provide some of that connective tissue that all of you are talking about. So we're excited to be bringing that to young people and would love to sort of hear a little bit from each of you about how the approaches that you're speaking about and sort of how the work that you've done, what you've been finding about differentiating to young people, because we know that is the foundation for generational change, and that often there is adultism and things that unintentionally leave young people feeling like they are not part of the civic fabric of our city, and that things need to be a little bit differentiated, both in terms of the voice and the methodologies that we communicate. Dancing is a great start, but building on Kathleen's answer, would love to hear about what you think we all can be doing to ensure that our young people have the skills and knowledge and networks they need to be the civic participants and leaders of today and tomorrow.
Sarah, do you want to go first, and then I can go?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the youth engagement as part of our PB program. Interestingly, and many of you may know this already. I mean, our very first pilot was right during the middle of the pandemic, and we had a youth-focused PB pilot that was $100,000 of expense funding. It was youth-led, and we had, really, it was a great moment to connect with a population that most people were not thinking about connecting with during the middle of the pandemic. So I think that was really great for us, and we've tried to really think about and continue to build on that, because the PB process obviously is open to anyone 11 and up. So trying to find ways not only to involve youth, also to create pathways for leadership development. So one of the things we were able to do in the last cycle was integrate young people as leaders in our borough assembly committees. So there were students who were part of, and these borough assembly committees were charged with taking the thousands of ideas that people had put forward during idea generation sessions and vetting those ideas and coming up with ballots for the neighborhood and for the borough. So we worked with young people to help facilitate those conversations. In each borough assembly, there was a youth person who helped kind of lead. There were a couple of youth who helped lead that discussion, and it was an intergenerational conversation. So we're hoping to, continue that kind of work with young people leading in that way. Also looking to deepen our partnership with the schools over the next year as well, and certainly working with organizations such as yours and many others who we hope will help us connect better to young people.
Yeah, and I'll just say, and Sandra, you know this stuff better than certainly better than I do. But I think what I think that the idea of in my mind, just expanding the definition of civic engagement is super duper important for I think to engage all of New Yorkers, but certainly young people, like getting way beyond elections, so that we're really thinking about civic engagement as being engaged in your neighborhood, on your block, at your local park, in your school, with in your faith institution, at your library. Like there's so many opportunities at the YMCA, like all at the rec center, your local rec center. Those are all opportunities to kind of plug in to the kind of superstructure that is New York City. And I really believe that, like, once you do that, and I think Kathleen said this before, you step into one portal and then you quickly kind of move into other portals. So I think we really need to be taught, and I know this was organized by Go Vote. So I'll say voting is hugely important, and really thinking about civic engagement and talking to young people about being engaged, about service, about paying attention to and caring about and being involved in shaping their neighborhoods, the places that mean the most to them, I think is hugely important, and so much of the work that you do, Santa, and a lot of the folks on the phone. I think we've really tried to be super cognizant, and I will say, even though I'm a mom and I really love my kids, I forget sometimes like how critically important it is to include young people. So we've been making a real conscious effort to do everything from, we did this kind of Commissioner for a Day program, which was cool because then it gave us the opportunity to partner with certainly with DOE, but also with other kind of youth agencies that we don't often, that I don't think we often think of as specifically as youth agencies. So Department of Probation is a big one, with ACS, which we do think of as a youth agency, but with those folks to make sure that we're also engaging folks, the young people who will least likely be engaged through kind of conventional methods. So making sure all of the children, all of our young New Yorkers have the opportunity to really experience government kind of hands-on. So those kinds of things I think are critically important to tap into the institutions. The DOE is obviously like the behemoth and the beauty and the everything that is New York City and so much a gigantic part of our infrastructure. And really figuring out ways to make sure that we're making connections between stuff kids are already doing and ways they can do more of that stuff.
Isaiah, am I pronouncing your name right? You had a question?
You're pronouncing it right. Thank you. Yeah, actually, so Sonda asked my question very similarly as well. One of the things I guess it was just slightly different is, so we do a lot of work to try and engage youth of African descent specifically, and one of the biggest things we're constantly hearing is my vote doesn't count. I care about X, Y, and Z issue, but my vote doesn't count. And what we really struggle with is like kind of getting people to understand how your vote really connects to the things that you're passionate about, like to the service, to the beyond the ballot box, and to all the things that were kind of just mentioned. So I guess if like you guys would like to, I mean, you said most of everything already, but how you guys are kind of engaging with the education aspect of really teaching young folk how the system works and how the best ways to how your vote really makes an impact, I guess.
I just want to highlight, you work at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College.
I know, doing a lot of work with young people. That's great.
Hi, Isaiah. So I would love to jump in on this one. So first of all, you guys do amazing work over there. And give my love to Lurie. One of the things that we cover in our teach-in that DNYC developed in partnership with Community Resource Exchange, and they're on the line here as well. We tell the truth, tell the story, and tell the truth. Building civic trust is about being consistent and being transparent, right? And just making it plain. And so we acknowledge that, government has gotten it wrong a lot. That history has just screwed it up a lot, and that the history that you're getting, you are not getting a full story. So we talk about when different groups actually got the right to vote and garnered it. Then we talk about what is actually at stake when you're voting. And then we show people, we ask them to talk about how many people are in their phones or on their social media, et cetera, to show them their own reach. And once we have established that, we then start to tell them the true stories of elections that have happened near them, like the Queens DA winning a primary by 60 votes. And most of us can get more people than that at a barbecue. We talk about a city council member in Brooklyn winning primary by 100 votes. I mean, it was a nail biter. And look how small that is. You go to concerts, you go to parties with more people than that. You can text more people than that in your phone. And so we show people, not only can you reach more than enough people through relational organizing, and we give them the tools and show them how to do that to actually impact the race in your neighborhood. We show them how close these margins have been and how with less with just very little effort, they can have a voice and they can make an impact. And then we drive that point home and we talk about who's on the ballot, what roles, not what people. We don't touch candidates. CFP will give you all that information. But we talk about what the roles are and how that translates to garbage pickup, to the speed bumps on your street, how it translates directly to your day-to-day life. Because again, everybody wants to know, what's in this for me? What does this have to do with me? But when people find out that 60 votes tip the balance of an election, 100 votes tip the balance of an election, it really has brought the point home.
I want to add to this, specifically to the African community component. I mean, one of the things that was, very telling for me and what I spent some time working on, particularly in my past role as an advisor on Muslim engagement, is that in terms of data, the African immigrant community is really lost in the mix, right? Like the way that we capture data about African Americans and it doesn't kind of pay attention to the different immigrant experience that African immigrants have, right? Because everyone is lumped under one category usually. And so trying to think through how does city government connect better with the African immigrant community was very important to me in my work at doing Muslim engagement, because there's a sizable Muslim African community in New York City. So I think working with in partnership with everyone to kind of uplift the data for that community, I think is really important. And then I also wanted to share kind of a story of this community and how, it was really wonderful. Commissioner for a day, Betsy, the young woman who was with us and with me, was connected to, was of African immigrant descent, and then was with a mosque in the Bronx. And after she spent the day here and learned about the different things we were doing, she was like, I like to get my mosque involved in the PB program. And she took it upon herself to set up the pathways for us to connect with that mosque in the Bronx, and connected me to the community leaders who approved, this participation of the community in the PB process. As a result of her initiative and leadership, we had over 170 people fill out PB ballots in that mosque. So it's a wonderful story of how someone can walk in through the door, right, and find ways to connect with the processes that we have. And really, and she was like, oh, we'd love to do idea generation next time, right? So now for this cycle, I'm looking to connect that mosque with partners who can go in and help that community and connect better with the different phases of PB. So I think uplifting the stories of people from that community and really celebrating what that community, specifically the African immigrant community, has been able to do in New York City is also a really important piece of what we could do together.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate the responses.
Are there other questions? Otherwise, we can discuss CUNY a bit, which John has raised, which is for certain an elephant when it comes to civic participation in the city, or it could be. But I don't know. John?
Hi, everyone. CUNY is huge, has hundreds of thousands of students, 21, maybe it's more than that by now, separate units. Maybe it's up to 23 separate units with some of our newer schools. And we have a Citizenship Now program that helps immigrant origin students become naturalized. Their voter registration activities, sort of like, the Civic Week that we talked about in the public school setting, on the campuses. And I know this, the chancellor's office would like to be able to determine how many of our students are registered and whether they are voting or not. And I think we know pretty much how many CUNY students there are in each legislative district, because we have people's home addresses and you can run them through geocoding, and that sort of who represents you type software can identify where they are. So CUNY can tell a council person or a state assembly member, oh, you've got 4,000 CUNY students in your district. But I don't think we've gotten to the point yet where we know whether people are voting, but it's something that we're working on. And once we do that, I think we can ramp up the targeted activities towards, where we think there's a lot of upside potential to get people involved. And I think, CUNY students are a bit older than kids who were in high school. There are lots of clubs of different sorts on the campuses, a lot of political science majors, a lot of people interested in social movements and civil rights and human rights. And I think it's a community that we can engage more effectively with some real impact. But just like city government is a big behemoth that's not easy to turn on a dime, CUNY is also. But I mean, as Kathleen has already mentioned, we were able to put a couple of hundred students. CUNY was very intimately involved in the funding, in channeling the funding from the city census efforts out into the trusted organizations and helping to measure what the impacts were. And our Center for Urban Research had the hard to count map that showed people on a daily basis how the count was coming along during the census. And I think that that effort was really very successful in moving the city towards a more full count. With people weren't expecting that the census was going to show 8.8 million people living in the city, and I think it's a testament to the work that Kathleen and the various teams did, and shows that this type of effort can really have an important impact.
John, thanks for pointing out what the chancellor said. And I know Dr. Said said she wants to talk more about this, and I would too. I mean, I think there's just a lot of potential here to think about all the different ways CUNY students and staff can be involved in getting out the vote and increasing engagement. I didn't see any other hands, but last call before Neil closes us out. Okay.
Oh, a question from Marguerite.
Not so much of a question, but I am really appreciating hearing the dialogue around what has been working and what has not been working, and then the learnings from that. I feel like from our organization, from Faith in New York, we've been kind of in this place of using a lot of the things that we learned from the census work, trying to bring that into what we're doing now. And still, I think also facing the challenges of, the post-COVID emergency world, and figuring out, how to be able to blend those two, while also just being very frank, to see the underinvestment that we're seeing in voting for this year in particularly, and then going forward as well too, just across the board. And so I guess the question that I have around this is really thinking about how are you all approaching that, the disconnect that is happening? And I'm hearing a lot of the different new partnerships that are coming up, but I'm also thinking about just the Saturday we were over at one of our congregations, the High Bridge Church, and they're being able to do all of these giveaways. We're able to do voter registration and everything, but the continued presence is so important there. Like you said, the trusted messenger aspect is so important there. And I just wonder about kind of the aspect of hope. And maybe this is kind of the last, maybe this is why where is what hope can we be able to really give to people in terms of how, not just how their vote really matters, but how their actual material conditions can really change. I feel like that is part of the key that we've been continually mulling over to be able to really express to people that this is not just, okay, there's somebody different in office or things like that, but that the things that they're struggling with, their jobs and everything else, are going to be made different because they come out, because they make this, so sometimes they're rushing to work, they're rushing to do other things, but because they stop and talk with us, that somehow their lives can get incrementally better.
Kathleen, I feel like I have some ideas, but you go.
So one of the things, and hi, Marguerite. So one of the Faith in New York jumped in and was so helpful, as a partner in the June primary. So much love. So one of the things is bringing the message home, but allowing people, opening the portal that shows them what they can do to impact their current situation. Often at teach-ins, we're talking about voting and voter registration, and someone will come to me about a problem on their block. And and so we connect them and we show them how that works. I think one of the immediate ways is participatory budgeting. They get involved in a process and they can jump into idea generation, or they can jump in and for the vote portion. There are a number of ways to enter into that process. But immediately after that vote is tabulated, the winners, the projects are announced that win, and they go into immediately they start making this happen. So when people can see that they made a difference, that they had an impact, and PB is one of those quick ways that they can actually see it. Wow, I went to this, I learned about these ideas, I voted for this, and wow, look, in 1 year's time, I'm going to see that, and that they would know that happened. The other way, again, is constantly showing them that what is at stake, and what is at stake in their own block, what is at stake in their own world, and what they care about. And when you are voting, or when you're participating with these roles, with these elected offices, this is what it impacts and this is what it changes. And more importantly, once you've cast your ballot, how do you maintain communication and information from those offices? Because a lot of people keep thinking that at the end of the election, it's all over. And now, nothing happens. No, the work continues and their voices need to be heard. So giving them not just the agency and empowerment to go and cast a vote, but then showing them those portals. How do you now access these offices? How do you now stay engaged, get engaged? How do you make sure that the most important thing that we discussed in teach-ins, the most important thing is not just that your elected leaders. The most important thing is that they know you. And so now how do you make that happen? And I think that that's been effective, because people are telling me, oh, I made a call and now I got invited to this and I got invited to a board and so on and so forth. And so they're learning how to take that message back and how to get more people involved in a pipeline in their communities.
I might just quickly add, and Marguerite, I really appreciated your question. I think, and maybe controversially, I think we got to shift away from, if you vote, everything will change. That this is not a one-night stand. This is like a long-term relationship. Like that we're really that this like idea of like government and communities in partnership together, that has responsibilities on both sides. That government shoulders a huge amount of responsibility for delivering services and listening to constituents and working together with constituent stuff. But that means New Yorkers too have a responsibility to engage in that stuff. So I think that has to go beyond elections. It has to be like being like, again, like kind of a constant drumbeat, recognizing that it's government's responsibility to facilitate that conversation in a way that makes sense and is accessible to folks. But that has to be, it's got to be ongoing, sustained, all that stuff.
I appreciate both of those comments. Thank you so much.
So I will just wrap us up. I know we're a little past time. I just want to do two important things. The first is to thank Martha for moderating and our three fantastic speakers, Betsy, Kathleen, and Dr. Saeed for joining us today, for giving us, I think, a much greater sense of the vision behind your work, the connection between your offices, and some real texture and examples of what the work looks like. And I think importantly for the funders and grantees on the call, really a chance to understand how and when to connect into your offices and your work. So thank you for taking the time this morning and for your vision and leadership in your offices. The second thing I wanted to do is just to preview our next learning session, which is coming up on Tuesday, December 5th. We're going to be focusing on vote by mail. There have been a number of recent developments in New York on mail voting, including a new law that was passed by the legislature at the end of the session, signed into law by the governor just a couple of weeks ago, and there's already a lawsuit. So Susan Lerner from Common Cause New York will kind of give us an update on the state of play on that. And then we'll also get a perspective on what other states are doing. The Brennan Center will give us kind of an overview of that, Andrew Garber, and then Bishop Dwayne Royster will be joining us. He has been involved in a lot of the vote by mail work in Pennsylvania, and a chance to really kind of hear how that's been working in another state, which has some similarities to New York. So that program is on Tuesday, December 5th at 10 a.m. by Zoom. Obviously, we'll send out more information on how to register, but please put it on your calendars now. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning for, I think, a really insightful and valuable conversation.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.